Hello everyone, I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
And thank you all so much for joining us today. Albert Fish, Part 2.
If you thought last week was bad, it is about to get a whole lot worse.
Yeah, it sure is.
So last week, as you know, we met the man known as the Werewolf of Wisteria.
Lucky us.
We discussed some of his crimes already, but today we're going to be talking about the horrific acts that he committed that earned him a spot in grim history.
We're also going to be talking about his eventual capture and, thankfully, his death.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, he's not alive anymore.
Yeah, he did. It goes without saying, but we are headed down some very, very dark territory today.
So grab your emotional support blankie, pet a dog, hug a dog, and take some very deep breaths because here we go. Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I will ever be.
All right, let's kick this off. We last left off with Albert Fish encountering the Budd family. Their son, Edward Budd, had placed a classified ad in the New York World looking for work. Upon Albert's return to the Budd home, he met 10-year-old Grace Budd. He agreed that he would hire her brother and said he would arrange for him to accompany him for work a few days later.
The family had absolutely no reason not to trust Albert. He presented as a reasonably well-versed man, and his grandfatherly nature would prove not to only be very misleading, but deadly. Despite this, he was able to make them comfortable with him.
And he clearly took a liking to Grace. Albert told the Budd family that he was headed to a birthday party at his sister's home and invited Grace to come along. He told her parents that there would be children her age and she would have a wonderful time. He promised to return her home safely.
He already had a plan in mind. The difference is that the intended victim was Edward. He took Grace to the spot he had picked out for her brother and instead victimized her in one of the most horrific ways that we have ever heard about.
Grace Budd would never be seen again. The family would not know the truth for 7 years.
Originally, a man named Charles Edward Pope was arrested for the kidnapping of the girl. He spent 108 days in jail before he was proven to be innocent.
Now, how was the Budd family able to prove that Albert Fish was the one involved in all of this?
Well, he definitely gave himself away.
Yes, because think about it. Back then, they would not have had really a way to track him. They didn't know his real name, address, or really anything else about him. He essentially vanished into thin air until he decided to brag, that is.
Yes, because if there's one thing we know about serial killers, it's that a lot of them love to talk about their crimes.
Yep.
When we talk about BTK like this, that is how he got caught. That it's just a thing. They want people to know what they're proud of their actions.
There's an ego that can't stand for someone else to take the credit for their horrific actions.
Oh, absolutely. And I find it interesting that it took him almost a decade before he reached out and did this. We know some killers like to taunt the victims' families, but I wonder how long he wanted to do this.
Oh, I would imagine he thought about it for some time. The letter itself was not signed by Albert. It was delivered along with their other mail in an envelope marked with a hexagon containing the letters NYPCBA, which stood for New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association.
It really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Right? Yeah, great name. And dear listeners, like we said before, we are going to be sharing the letter in its entirety, along with another very disturbing confession later.
And so here's your warning to skip ahead before we start, if you need to.
And Charlotte, you drew the short straw here,
I did.
So you're going to be reading the letter for us along with all of the grammatical errors that Albert Fish included. Take it away.
Okay, bear with me. Dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco for Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 per pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or a girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body, and sold as veal cutlet, brought the highest price. John stayed there so long he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7 and one 11, took them home to his home, stripped them naked, and tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night he spanked them, tortured them to make their meat good and tender. First, he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass and, of course, the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried, and stewed. The little boy was next and went the same way. At that time, I was living at 409 East 100th Street near Right Side. He told me so how often good human flesh was, and I had made up my mind to taste it. I hate that he feels it necessary to open this story with like a historical story.
Like a prequel to what he did?
It's awful that he forces the reader to read all of this traumatic and horrible stuff before he even gets to the point.
And I do want to say, I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but later when police would investigate this letter, it was never proven that ever really happened.
So it could have just been some horrible and frankly racist story that he made up out of the blue.
Yes.
That is even worse. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch, Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death and then cut her into small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was, roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her, though I could have had I wished. She died a virgin. Oh, wow. Thank you for clarifying there, Albert.
He did say that, and then later he admitted he did sexually assault her. So.
Oh, my God. So you lay all of this absolutely disgusting, vile whatever out on the table.
Yeah.
But then you choose to lie and then be like, oh, no, actually, I did. So did you just have guilty feelings about that particular part of the horrific show in the time?
Right?
And then you're like, oh, I changed my mind.
What is the justification for including that last bit? Like, oh, but it's okay.
It's okay. She died a virgin. Ugh.
So, yeah, that's the letter, you guys. I know a lot of you who know true crime have probably heard the letter. It's very infamous at this point, but you know, throughout the last couple weeks that I've been doing the research for this, I've read it a few times, and it doesn't get easier to read.
No, absolutely not. It's like the most horrific things you could think of. Like I said in part 1 of this series, he is a sadomasochistic, cannibalistic serial killer who preys on children.
Yeah.
You do not get more depraved than that, except for the fact that he then wrote to her family and recounted everything.
It was her mother, Delia, who originally opened the letter. However, she could not read, so she handed it to Edward, who not only had to read the letter, he had to repeat it to his mother.
Oh my God.
Yep. It's tough. This is a tough episode. We've talked a lot about some pretty dark stuff throughout the course of this podcast, but you know, cannibalism in itself, obviously horrific topic. But when you're talking about a child,
again, I've said it before. I do repeat myself a lot because the point needs to be made again and again.
Mhm.
It's one thing to murder another human being, which
Yep.
is a really horrific thing in and of itself. But to be able to do that to a child, the one thing in this world that you should not be able to bring yourself to behave that
No.
way at all. It just shouldn't, the information shouldn't be there,
No,
right?
absolutely not.
And then he did, and all over the place, and it was freaking awful. The police were contacted, and an investigation into the writer of the letter began. They first went to the NYPCBA, where they spoke to a janitor. He told them that he had taken some of the stationery home and had been using it. However, he told them it was not him who wrote it.
The janitor lived at a boarding house on 200 East 52nd Street. After speaking with the landlady, police were told about an old man who had checked out a few days prior. Police had been informed about quote-unquote Frank Howard, and it turned out that the man matched his description perfectly. Luckily, he was due to pick up a check from the address in the days coming.
Lead investigator William F. King waited outside the room and was eventually met by Albert Fish. He was asked to come to the police station for questioning and agreed.
He seemed cooperative until they reached the main entrance to the building. Albert swung at King while holding a razor blade in each hand. And this is a teeny tiny old man. Like, keep that in mind.
Just dual wielding razor blades.
Yes. He was immediately disarmed and taken into custody. At no point did he deny that he killed Grace. He fully admitted that he had originally planned to murder Edward, but changed his mind when he saw the little girl.
That isn't... Poor Edward. Not only is he her big brother,
yeah,
and so I'm sure, as most big brothers do, feel that responsibility to protect your little sister, but now he must be feeling horrific survivor's guilt, knowing that he was the intended target, and then Mr. Fish here changed his mind when he saw his beautiful, innocent little sister.
And keep in mind, Edward was the one who placed the wanted ad in the first place.
So true.
The level of guilt that this boy, he's only 18. So the level of guilt that he felt, I obviously I feel horrible for the whole family, but I can't imagine what Edward had to live with for the rest of his life.
Oh my God. To live with that.
Yeah.
Unimaginable. Okay, let's quickly talk about the needles, because we mentioned those last week.
Yay.
Days after Albert was arrested, he spoke to various detectives and was evaluated by psychiatrists. He told them about his love of sticking needles into his stomach and groin.
They didn't believe him. After all, who would do that? Because honestly, he said that and they're like, no, you're lying.
Well, like, I initially thought, when you see those x-rays,
yeah,
how can you live with that many things perforating your abdomen?
Oh, yeah.
And especially in those days, it doesn't take much to get an infection and die.
And keep in mind, like, if you haven't seen the x-ray photos, we posted them on social media, but if you haven't seen them, he didn't like poke it into the surface and just like put them in, like they are in there.
You can see them in his pelvis, in his abdomen, in his groin.
Yep.
And most of them are sewing needle sized, how you would imagine.
And then there's that one big one. But then there's
one big one that's like 4 inches and it looks like a pen.
Yeah.
Or a pencil or something. They did happen to notice, though, that he walked kind of strange and that every time he sat down, he would wince in pain.
They agreed to x-ray him, and that was when they found 29 needles embedded into his body. He told them that he did it to atone for his sins and stated,
I always seem to enjoy everything that hurt.
Like we mentioned, a whole 7 years went by before the murderer of Grace Budd was found. So, what exactly was Albert Fish doing during that time?
So there were definitely other children who went missing. 2 of them have been proven to be linked to Albert. The first that we know of is 9-year-old Francis McDonald.
Francis had been playing catch with his friends. His parents waited and waited for him to return home, but that never happened.
A search for the missing boy was organized, and eventually he was found. Francis was dead and hanging from a tree. The autopsy revealed that he had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death with his own suspenders. His body bore numerous large cuts and bruises, and the majority of the flesh on his left hamstring had been removed.
The boys that Francis had been playing with told police that he was taken away by an elderly man with a gray mustache. When his mother heard this, she recalled to police that she had seen a man matching his description earlier that day. She would later tell reporters,
"He came shuffling down the street, mumbling to himself and making queer motions with his hands. I saw his thick gray hair and drooping gray mustache. Everything about him seemed faded and gray."
and this would be the quote that would later earn Albert Fish the nickname, the Gray Man. And when you look at him,
Gray is definitely a good description. I mean, it helps that all the photos are in black and white, for sure.
Yeah.
But he does have that sort of vibe to him, shall we say.
He's we keep in mind, like, he's tiny, he's skinny, he's old. He is a scary looking dude.
He is. He's again, they all seem to have that look in their eyes. And I don't know what it is, but the little lizard brain in the back of my skull is like, something's not
Stay
right
away.
there. Albert Fish would not admit to Francis's murder until after his trial.
On February 11th, 1927, another child disappeared. This time it was Billy Gaffney. He was only 4. He had been playing outside with his 3-year-old neighbor, also named Billy, that might get confusing, when he was kidnapped and never seen alive again.
His friend was also taken away, but was found on the roof of their apartment building. Police questioned Billy, who told them that his friend had been taken away by the boogeyman.
The police didn't think much of that statement, but it could not be more true.
Multiple people were arrested for the murder of Billy Gaffney, but it wasn't until Albert Fish was on the front page of the newspaper that he was even linked to the crime. A trolley driver saw the photo of him and recognized him from years prior. He wrote to the police and told them that he remembered seeing Albert with a crying boy. The boy looked scared and wasn't wearing a jacket, and he was also repeatedly crying out for his mother.
See something, say something.
Abso-fucking-lutely. You never know. And as much as it might be embarrassing in the moment if you're wrong, it's better to be wrong than have Mr. Albert Fish run away with a child.
You know, it's interesting because this happened the other day to me. I was at work, and one of my coworkers is 65. Very much grandma, like,
Love.
you know, she's got lots of kids. She's just grandma. That's who she is. And we're working and we see this child being dragged by this woman, and the child is screaming bloody murder. Like, I want my mom. I want my mom. I don't want to go with you. And like, 65-year-old woman, I've never seen her take off that fast. She dropped what she was doing. She's like, I need to go. And she ran after this woman and was like, is this child supposed to be with you? And the lady was like, this is my granddaughter. Like, she just doesn't want to go with me. But she's like, I don't care. I don't care.
Yes.
The lady was pissed at me. I do not care. I am just glad that at least now I know. And it's okay. And the lady was like, this is her brother. Like, it's fine. She's just, you know, she's having some.
And it's embarrassing. And it's like, I'm sorry, Grandma, that you took the kids for a day out and it's not going the way you expected. And clearly there's a lot of awkwardness and embarrassment around that. But again, I would rather be like your coworker and it's like, okay, everything was actually okay. It's fine. Because kids be kids sometimes.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, I would rather know, okay, at least I said something. Or heaven forbid, at least if I hear about it on the news tomorrow, I can be like, oh my God, I saw that happen.
Well, that's just it. Because how many times do people just not say anything because they don't want to be rude? And we hear that all the time. And it's like, you know what? Sometimes be rude.
Absolutely. You know what? We're human beings. You're going to encounter rude people sometimes. Again, better to be rude and be mistaken than let it happen.
I completely agree with that. The man that Billy was with forcefully dragged him off the trolley. Both the description of him and the child match the story. Billy's mother actually visited Albert Fish in Sing Sing after his arrest for the murder of Grace Budd in an effort to get a confession out of him.
And she got what she wanted, but unfortunately, it was delivered in true Albert Fish style, and we're now going to share this written confession with you.
Once again, this is your warning to skip ahead if you want to sleep tonight.
This time, Dina, you can take it away.
I'm kind of glad it wasn't you for both of them. I'm not going to lie, but I feel this one to me is worse.
No.
Alrighty.
Okay, brace.
Okay. I brought him to the Riker Avenue dumps. There is a house that stands alone not far from where I took him. I took the boy there, stripped him naked and tied his hands and feet and gagged him with a piece of dirty rag I picked out of the dump. Then I burned his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took the trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked home from there. Next day, about 2 p.m., I took tools, a good heavy cat-o'-nine-tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these halves into 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind until the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear. This is a 4-year-old child.
Again, absolutely horrific. He is just seeing what he can do.
Yep.
Ugh.
They call this, with serial killers, berserker mode.
Yes.
This is absolutely berserker mode with him. He is off the rails. Gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. I picked up 4 old potato sacks and gathered a pile of stones. Then I cut him up. I had a grip with me. I put his nose, ears, and a few slices of his belly in the grip. Then I cut him through the middle of his body, just below the belly button. Then through his legs about 2 inches below his behind. I put this in my grip with a lot of paper. I cut off the head, feet, arms, hands, and the legs below the knee. This I put in sacks weighed with stones, tied the ends, and threw them into pools of slimy water you will see all along the road going to North Beach. I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body I liked best. His monkey and peewees, and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears, nose, pieces of his face, and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt, and pepper. It was good. Then I split the cheeks of his behind open, cut off his monkey and peewees, and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind and put them in the oven. Then I picked 4 onions when the meat had roasted about a quarter of an hour. I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon so the meat would be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours, it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind did. I ate every bit of the meat in about 4 days. His little monkey was sweet as a nut, but his peewees I could not chew, and I threw them in the toilet.
That is rancid.
Yeah.
And I don't know how as a human being you could do that and then it's like, oh, this is just a pot roast.
There is a part of my brain when reading this that is, your brain wants to protect you.
Yes.
And there's a part of my brain when reading this that's like, this didn't happen. This isn't true. No one would do that. But he did.
He absolutely did. I don't know, man. I'm at a loss. I'm not. I just want to swear a lot. And
I want to yell. I don't like it. Honestly, and the thing is, I think that's the appropriate reaction to have to this. I don't think that this is something that we should ever look at and be like, yeah, that's a serial killer. He is so far above and beyond, I think, in many ways, anyone that we've ever talked about, because he's proud of what he did. He doesn't see that it was wrong. And if he does, he doesn't care. But he talks about this like it's the fucking, like, when you look up a recipe online and you have the person's life story before.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, okay, Brenda, we don't need the life story. We just want the recipe, right? I think you can truly tell this is also his sadism coming into play, because he would not have written this down on paper for anyone else unless he was getting something out of it. And what he is getting out of it is the pain of his victims' families.
Absolutely.
It's not just about inflicting physical pain on himself and others. It's the emotional and psychological damage that comes along with it. And he knew how to do that to a T. Because, I mean, not only does this ruin my week even thinking about.
Yes.
If this was your child, it would ruin your life.
Oh, there's no coming back from this. And to me, it seems like he did the crime. He enjoyed it, quote unquote, because he did. He's disgusting.
Yes.
But by saying all of this again, he gets to relive that. And you can almost see with how he speaks about it. It's very candid. It's very graphic. He enjoyed it. He loved talking about this.
Undoubtedly. The trial of Albert Fish began on March 11th, 1935 in the town of White Plains, New York. It lasted 10 days. Albert Fish stated he had committed the crimes due to insanity. He spoke about God telling him to kill children and recalled how he heard voices.
Several psychiatrists spoke about his various fetishes, including but not limited to urophilia, masochism, and coprophilia. However, the question was, did him having these fetishes mean he was insane? Keep in mind, this is in the 30s.
So I would say it would have been almost more shocking to them then.
Oh my God, of course. This was unheard of back then.
They probably didn't even have words for some of these things.
That's just it.
One of the chief witnesses for the defense was psychiatrist Frederick Wortham, who specialized in childhood development. He had examined Albert Fish and told the court about how he believed cannibalizing the children was very similar to communion. During these conversations, Albert also compared what he was doing to the biblical stories of Abraham and Isaac. I don't think I buy this.
No.
I think Albert Fish was purely sadomasochistic and hedonistic and did whatever he wanted for his own pleasure.
Yep.
I don't think there was actually any part of him that believed there was a religious purpose to this.
No, even the shoving of the needles where he says it's his like penance for the sins. He did it because he fucking liked it.
He liked it. And he said, I enjoyed the way it hurt. He wasn't doing that because he felt guilty about anything.
Someone like this, I don't think is capable of feeling guilt.
No, absolutely not. I would say they're an animal, but even animals don't do shit like this
That's
to one
just
another.
it. He believed that sacrificing a boy would be penance for his own sins. As for Grace, the psychiatrist stated that Albert had perceived her as a boy. In the trial, he stated,
Now, in this case, there is a presumption of sanity. The proof, briefly, will be that this defendant is legally sane and that he knows the difference between right and wrong and the nature and quality of his acts, that he is not defective mentally, that he had a wonderful memory for a man of his age, he has complete orientation as to his immediate surroundings, there is no mental deterioration, but that he is sexually abnormal, that he is known medically as a sex pervert or a sex psychopath, that his acts were abnormal, but that when he took this girl from her home on the 3rd day of June, 1928, and in doing that act and in procuring the tools with which he killed her, bringing her up here to Westchester County and taking her into this empty house surrounded by woods in the back of it, he knew it was wrong to do that, and that he is legally sane and should answer for his acts. And I, for one, agree with this particular outlook on Albert Fish.
Off topic, but not off topic fully. The site that he killed her at is now an edible arrangement.
Good heavens.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it with Mr. Willie Picton.
Yeah.
Life goes on, I suppose, but I don't think I would be ordering Albert Fish edible arrangements.
No.
I'm so sorry you picked a bad location for an edible arrangement.
Honestly, no. That needs to be like just a black hole in the ground.
Yeah, like glass it. Nothing can live there. Scorched earth.
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank you.
Various other people testified, including his stepdaughter. She spoke about him playing games with her as a child. And the games we're talking about are the games from last week.
In his final argument, the defense stated,
in the course of human nature, 10 of you, 12 men, will die in full possession of your reason and memory. When that hour comes, when the blood begins to congeal and the breath to fail, when death snaps one by one the strings of life, when you look back to the past and forward to judgment, remember Albert Fish. That was when he was helpless and defenseless and pleaded with you for his life, that you said, let him live or let him die. And if you said, let him die, may he who breathed into your nostrils the breath of life judge you more mercifully than you judged this maniac.
I really hate it when they do that.
I hate it. Why do we see this all the time? And you know what? I say this all the time. I'm not for the death penalty. Albert Fish, roast him alive.
I'm sorry. You lost your right to live amongst the civil members of human society. When you do that to children, you fucking lose all your privileges, man.
You lose your human card. You are no longer, first of all, you're no longer a member of society. We know that. But you are no longer a human in my mind when you can do this and be okay with yourself. Even if you can't be okay with yourself, you do this kind of crime, you're done.
It drives me nuts when the defense at the ends of cases like this are like, don't put him to death. You wouldn't want to do that. They're not even arguing, oh, what he did.
Yeah.
They're just saying, like, oh, just don't give him the death penalty. I understand that lawyers, both on prosecution and defense, they have a job to do.
Yes.
And they're upholding a standard of law because that's what it's all about. It's like doctors do no harm, right? As a lawyer, you defend your defendant to the best of your ability.
Yes.
I get it. But how do some of you fuckers sleep at night after defending someone like this?
Can you imagine? And you're right, it's their job, and I get that. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking that is what they are paid good money to do. But I can't imagine being like, oh, yeah, he killed and ate children, but let's not hurt him.
Yeah, I'm not sure where, and perhaps there's folks out there that are morally better than me.
Sure.
I'll take it, but I can't wrap my head around trying to defend this guy one bit, even when it is your job.
Death by 1,000 cuts on this guy, seriously.
Although, unfortunately, he probably would have enjoyed it.
Oh my God, you're right. Throw him off a cliff, I don't know.
Exactly. Eventually, the jurors agreed that Albert Fish was, in fact, insane, but that he should be executed for his crimes. For the purpose of his sentencing, they stated that he was, in fact, sane.
So I found this interesting and confusing, but the best way I can kind of explain it is they all thought what he did was absolutely insane due to his beliefs and how he justified it. But they knew that he knew right from wrong, and he was perfectly aware of what he did. He premeditated it. And based on that, he was sane to them. And I agree.
Absolutely. And obviously there's nuance to every case, but I think it's, did you try to hide what you did?
Yes.
Did he sneakily manipulated the people around him to get what he wanted? A truly mad person that's acting completely irrational and outrageously doesn't stop to think about those things. Albert Fish absolutely did.
Yeah, that's well said. I completely agree with that.
With all that being said, Albert Fish was indeed sentenced to death and sent back to Sing Sing in March of 1935. Appeals against the death penalty were filed, but rejected.
Just after 11 a.m. on January 16th, 1936, Albert Fish was led to the electric chair. His last meal was reported to be roast chicken. And a week prior to that, he tried to kill himself with the bone from a steak.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they didn't want to feed him steak for his last meal.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It is also reported that he helped the executioner put the cap on his head and that his last words were, "I don't even know why I'm here."
I wonder if that was a last-ditch effort to be like, I have no faculties. You can't kill me. I don't know why I'm here.
Because he was old.
Yeah. Or it very well could have been by that point that he was indeed losing his marbles, but I don't know.
He was the oldest person to be executed at Sing Sing.
Wow.
Yeah.
The oldest person that Old Sparky got. Hey?
Yep.
There were rumors that he took longer to die due to the needles in his body. However, those rumors were proven to be untrue.
His lawyer would later say that Albert Fish wrote a series of letters and a final statement before his death, but he refused to share them, saying,
"I will never show that to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities I have ever read."
I can't even imagine, because the letters he wrote and the confession, they're so bad. He knew he would get the chance to say more. I think if he was like, this is my last chance to say everything I want to say, I can just go off.
Hard.
I can't even begin to imagine the filth.
Oh, I'm sure. You know what? As much as I do have a morbid curiosity, I think I am glad this particular lawyer decided to keep this to himself.
Good for him, because he was being offered a lot of money to share it.
I'm sure he was. I bet you media outlets all over the place were like, give me.
Yeah. And
because that would be the most sensationalist rot you ever put your eyes on.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the same guy who wanted to appeal his death sentence. But again, I get it. That was his job. I think a part of me enjoys the fact that once his job was over, he was like, no.
Kudos to you for that. Don't chase that man anymore. Leave him to rot in jail. And eventually Old Sparky got him anyway.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That brings us to the end of Albert Fish. Toodaloo, motherfucker.
Yep. Honestly, one of those series, you guys have been asking for it. We did it.
You asked for it.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would do that. I'm just kidding.
We know. We get it. We get it.
We're all here.
It's a story that I think deserves to be told due to the fact that, one of the reasons why I like true crime, I know for you as well, is it's fascinating to me to see the depths of which people will go into to cause them to do these things. And the fact that people like this can exist
Yeah.
is mind-blowing.
I often think, I don't know why my brain does this. Maybe it's because of the way I visualize. In my brain, I am the little pilot behind the flesh mech suit.
Yep.
So a lot of the times I compare brain function to almost like a robot function. And I just think when somebody goes off like this, for whatever reason, that brain has a bug in it and it's broken. Like it's glitching, it's firing off, it's become a deadly robot, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what it is, but obviously on a more biological, chemical level. That's going to sound like the most stoner shit ever.
Dude, no, but I get what you're saying, though. I totally get what you're saying. Because at that point, I think the disconnect, because our brain is supposed to stop us from doing these things.
Absolutely. There's the millions of years of evolution since we were teeny little cells in the ocean to where we are now, right? Certain fail safes have been evolved into our DNA to stop things like that happening. It's the reason why, like, parents, they're kept like tired and psychologically unstable because it's so that they don't kill their own children.
Yes.
Right. There's a reason why babies smell a certain way, or like why we get like the happy feelings when we see kids, because we're not supposed to be able to do the kind of shit that Albert Fish and Luis Garavito and all those fucking monsters do. It shouldn't, like I said, it's a glitch in the brain. It shouldn't be allowed to happen.
Yep.
But here we are talking about it. And like you say, I think that's why it's so fascinating to see when these things go so horrifically wrong.
And you're absolutely right. It could not have gone more wrong. I think, we obviously we talk about a lot of evil people, but to me, this is truly next level. And I think one of the worst.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely up there. Like I say, he's up there with Pee-wee. He's up there with Luis Garavito. When you're targeting children, you automatically go to the worst of the worst. So, I mean, say no more.
Yeah, and then throw in cannibalism into the mix. And that's the thing is, Luis Garavito, murderer, horrible, horrific victim count. Glad he's dead too. But the level of cannibalism and just depravity that we see with Albert Fish is what really sets him apart.
Absolutely. And that's all I'm going to say on that matter, I think.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think after this, you guys need to go walk around outside or something. I don't know what to tell you, but
I like to drive home with the windows down now that the weather's a little warmer. I like to crank my dad rock.
Yeah.
It's the good vibes after. It's a good brain scrub after this
nonsense. The brain bleach is important. If you want to keep
absolutely.
listening to our voices, go listen to fucking Mothman. I don't know what to tell you. Do something. Or go watch the Teletubbies. I don't know.
Yeah, although I hear they've got some pretty creepy lore. But anyway, we'll get into that another time. Okie dokie. We are at the end of the episode, which means, of course, we got to shout out our lovely patrons, as we always do.
We've been getting some feedback on the videos. I'm so glad you guys like them. We've had people sign up for the free tier, which I highly recommend doing if you want to support, but you don't necessarily want to spend any money, which that's totally okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get episode reveals for the free tier and all sorts of fun stuff for everything else. So check that out.
Absolutely.
All right. A huge thank you to Atlantean Jedi, Bob, Brian, Hillary, Judy, Kevinus Musicus, Lisa, Mayhem Mudkip, and Steven Centauri. You guys are the bee's knees.
You are the Titty City, the cat's pajamas, all that good shit. We love you. Thank you so much for your support. Like Dina says, we have a free tier on Patreon where you get the early episode reveals. But for all other content, you can find us on all the other social medias. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X. Oh my God, they even changed the URL the other day.
What?
Yeah, it's officially X.
Oh my God, no way.
It'll still be Twitter in my mind, Elon.
As long as it's existing, it'll be Twitter.
Yeah, we're also on TikTok as well. And obviously YouTube. You can listen to the podcast on just about every single podcast form that we could find out there, I think. What else?
And if you like us, interact with the content. I know that sounds like a tiny thing, but it goes a long way because the more you interact, the more it pleases those glorious algorithm gods. And we show up in other people's feeds and then they listen and it's a nice little cycle.
And they tell a friend and they tell a friend.
All right.
Well,
Jinx.
Yeah. Soda.
Oh my God. We need to just go frolic or something. I don't know what to tell you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. This has been
The Grim Curriculum.
For my fact today, I've decided to go lighthearted.
Oh, thank God for that.
I know. All right. So rather than say cheese when taking pictures, people used to say prunes.
That's so random.
I know.
My dad used to say some wild shit to make us smile when he was taking pictures back in the day, so...